The room went quiet when he said it. Not the kind of quiet that feels respectful. The kind that feels sharp, cold, humiliating. Daniel lifted a champagne glass and smiled like he had just delivered the joke of the night. Well, at least the settlement was cheaper than the marriage. Laughter broke out across the room. Soft at first, then louder. A few people looked at me. Some curious, some amused, others pretending not to stare. I didn't react. I simply took a sip of water and kept my posture straight. Because humiliation, when you survive enough of it, starts to feel familiar. 3 years earlier, I had signed divorce papers and walked away with $5 million. That's the part everyone remembers. That's the part people whisper about. But no one talks about what it cost me, or why I accepted it. People like simple stories. Gold digger leaves with millions. Man escapes bad marriage. Everyone moves on. Except life is never that simple. And tonight, the truth was about to surface. The engagement party was being held at the Grand Wellington Hotel in downtown Chicago. One of those places where everything shines. Crystal chandeliers, polished marble floors, tall windows overlooking the skyline. The kind of place where people come dressed like success and act like they own the world. Soft piano music floated through the air. Waiters moved through the crowd with silver trays. Champagne glasses sparkled under the lights. And everywhere I looked, there were people from Daniel's world. Investors, lawyers, tech executives, people who measure worth by numbers on a screen. Most of them hadn't seen me in years, but they remembered. I could see it in their faces. Recognition, then curiosity, then judgment. Claire. I turned. A woman in a silver dress tilted her head slightly. Melissa, one of Daniel's colleagues. She looked surprised. Oh wow, I didn't expect to see you here. Her smile was polite, but her eyes said something else. I received an invitation, I said calmly. Well, that's interesting. She glanced across the room toward Daniel. He was standing beside his fiancée, Lily, 28 years old, beautiful, confident, perfect for his new life. Melissa leaned closer. I'm surprised he invited you. I'm surprised too, I replied. The truth was, I almost didn't come. When the invitation arrived, I thought it was a mistake. A thick white envelope, elegant lettering, formal invitation. Daniel and Lily, engagement celebration. But my name was there, printed clearly. No explanation, no note, just a date, a location, and a quiet reminder of a past that everyone thought was finished. For 2 days I stared at the invitation. Then I made a decision. I would go. Not for Daniel, not for closure, but because something about it felt strange. And I wasn't the only one who thought so. 2 days after I received the invitation, my phone rang. Claire. The voice was calm, measured, familiar. Ethan. Yes. Ethan Carter had been Daniel's business partner for nearly a decade. He was different from Daniel. Less flashy, more observant. The kind of man who listened before speaking. I heard you got an invitation, he said. Yes. Silence lingered on the line for a moment. Then he sighed softly. Something about this doesn't feel right. What do you mean? I'm not sure yet. Then why call me? Another pause. Because Ethan was careful with words. I think you should come to the party. I leaned back in my chair. I was planning to. Good. His tone became serious. And Claire. Yes. If something happens tonight, don't react too quickly. That sentence stayed with me. All week. Don't react too quickly. Back at the party, Daniel spotted me across the room. Our eyes met. His smile widened. He walked over slowly. Confident. Relaxed. Like a man who believed he had already won. Claire, he said, it's been a while. Yes, I replied. It has. He looked me up and down briefly. Not rudely. Just enough to remind me he was evaluating. You look well. Thank you. And I see you decided to come. You invited me. He laughed. Fair point. Lily approached us then. Her smile was warm, but curious. Daniel, she said softly, aren't you going to introduce me? He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Of course. He turned toward me. Claire, this is Lily, my fiancée. Lily extended her hand. Nice to meet you. I shook it gently. You too. Daniel added casually. Claire and I used to be married. Lily laughed lightly. Oh, I know. Then she looked at me. You left with quite a settlement. The words were polite, but the room around us suddenly felt very quiet. Daniel chuckled. $5 million, he said. Best investment I ever made. More laughter from nearby guests. I felt their eyes again. Waiting, watching, expecting anger or embarrassment. Instead, I smiled. I hope it was worth it. Daniel raised his glass. Oh, it was. Across the room, Ethan Carter was watching, and he didn't look amused. As the evening continued, the small moments of disrespect grew. Nothing dramatic, just subtle things. Little jokes, little comments. Daniel telling someone, divorce is expensive but peace is priceless. Another guest whispering, $5 million for a few years of marriage. Not bad. Someone else saying, I should get divorced more often. Every time, the laughter returned. And every time, I stayed calm, because something inside me told me tonight wasn't about humiliation. It was about patience. An hour later, Ethan approached me near the balcony. Are you okay? He asked quietly. Yes. You handled that well. I've had practice. He nodded, then looked across the room toward Daniel. Do you know why he invited you? No. I think I'm starting to understand. I studied his expression. What do you mean? Before he could answer, Daniel tapped spoon against his champagne glass. The room slowly quieted. He stepped onto the small stage near the center of the ballroom. Everyone, he said cheerfully, thank you for coming tonight. Guests turned toward him. The lights dimmed slightly. A projector screen lowered behind the stage. Daniel smiled proudly. I wanted tonight to be special. He wrapped an arm around Lily again, to celebrate the future. Applause followed. Then he looked across the room, directly at me. And sometimes the best way to celebrate the future, he paused, is by remembering the past. The projector flickered to life. Behind him, and suddenly, Ethan whispered something under his breath. Oh no! My chest tightened slightly. What is it? I asked, but Ethan didn't answer. He was staring at the screen, and whatever he saw there had drained all the color from his face. The projector hummed softly. A pale glow filled the ballroom. Conversations faded. Glasses stopped clinking. Everyone turned toward the screen. Daniel stood confidently at the front of the room, like a man about to deliver the perfect story. Behind him, the first image appeared. A photograph. Our wedding day. 5 years ago. I was standing beside him in a white dress. Young. Hopeful. Believing. A few guests murmured quietly. Daniel chuckled into the microphone. Throwback, he said. More laughter. He clicked the remote. Another photo appeared. A vacation picture. Us on a beach in California. Another click. A picture of our first apartment. Then another. Then another. It looked like a slideshow of our relationship. But something about it felt wrong. The photos weren't random. They were carefully chosen. Moments where I looked emotional. Tired. Upset. Not the happy pictures. The vulnerable ones. I felt Ethan step closer beside me. Claire, he whispered. Yes. I think he's setting you up. I didn't answer. I already knew. Daniel cleared his throat dramatically. You know, he said, pacing slowly across the stage, people always ask me the same question. He paused. Why did your marriage end? The crowd leaned in. Someone laughed softly. Daniel shrugged. Well, relationships are complicated. A few nods. But sometimes, he continued, you don't realize someone's true intentions until it's too late. Another slide appeared. This time it wasn't a photo. It was a document. A screenshot of a bank transfer. $5 million. The settlement. A quiet ripple moved through the crowd. Daniel smiled like a magician revealing the final card. $5 million, he repeated. He gestured toward me. For a marriage that lasted less than 4 years. Someone in the back whistled softly. Daniel continued. I guess you could say that was the most expensive mistake of my life. Laughter again. Not cruel, but careless. The kind of laughter people use when they want to be part of the moment. I felt dozens of eyes shift toward me. Waiting. Watching. Expecting a reaction. But I stayed still. Because something else was happening. And Ethan had noticed it too. Look at the bottom corner, he whispered. I looked at the screen again. At the document. At the small details most people would notice. And suddenly, I saw it. The timestamp. Wrong. The date on the document didn't match the timeline Daniel was describing. Not even close. My pulse slowed. Not faster. Slower. Because now I understood. Daniel thought he was telling the story. But he had just made a mistake. Back on stage, Daniel continued his speech. When Claire and I divorced, he said, people told me to fight the settlement. He shook his head. But I didn't. Another dramatic pause. Because peace is valuable. He lifted his glass again. And sometimes it's cheaper to pay someone to leave. A few guests laughed loudly. Someone clapped. Lily smiled beside him. But her smile looked uncertain. She glanced briefly toward the screen. Then toward me. Then back to Daniel. Something about the room was shifting. Not dramatically. Just enough to feel it. Like the air pressure changing before a storm. Ethan leaned closer. Did you notice Lily? Yes. She doesn't know. Know what? That Daniel is lying. I watched the stage quietly. Daniel continued flipping through slides. Now there were screenshots of text messages. Old ones. Conversations from years ago. But they were cropped. Edited. Pieces missing. Just enough to make it look like I had been asking about money. About security. About settlements. Gasps moved through the room. Someone whispered. Wow. Daniel sighed into the microphone. I didn't want to bring this up tonight, he said. But transparency matters. He turned toward Lily. I want our future to start with honesty. Then he looked directly at me again. Some people marry for love. Another pause. And some people marry for $5 million. The room erupted in uncomfortable laughter. I heard someone behind me whisper. That's brutal. But Ethan didn't laugh. He exhaled slowly. Unbelievable. I kept my eyes on the screen. Because something else had appeared. A file name. Small. Barely noticeable. But it changed everything. Across the room, a tall man stepped quietly toward the control booth. He wore a dark suit. Glasses. Silver hair. I recognized him immediately. Robert Hayes. Daniel's former legal advisor. And the man who handled our divorce settlement. Ethan saw him too. That's interesting, he murmured. Why? Robert hasn't worked with Daniel for 2 years. I watched as Robert spoke quietly to the technician at the projector. The technician looked confused. Robert nodded calmly, then handed him a small USB drive. My heartbeat slowed even more, because now the pieces were coming together. On stage, Daniel reached the final slide. A dramatic one. A giant image of the settlement agreement. His voice grew louder. You see, he said, some lessons in life are expensive. He gestured toward me. But they're worth learning. He raised his glass toward the crowd. To new beginnings. Applause filled the room. People lifted their drinks. The piano music returned softly. But just as Daniel stepped away from a microphone, the projector flickered. The screen went black. Guests murmured. Daniel turned around. Confused. Guys. The screen lit up again. But this time, the image was different. Not Daniel's slideshow. Not his documents. This was a video file. The timestamp showed a date. 3 years ago. The night before our divorce settlement. And suddenly, the entire ballroom fell silent. Because Daniel's voice filled the speakers. But it wasn't the confident voice from the stage. It was quiet, private, recorded. And the words that followed made Ethan whisper only one sentence. Oh my God. Daniel froze. His smile faded instantly. The ballroom lights felt brighter now. Sharper. The video on the screen began to play. At first, there was only a dark room. Then the sound of a chair moving. A glass touching a table. And then, Daniel's voice. Clear. Unfiltered. This stays between us, he said. The recording sounded private. Like it had been captured in an office. Not meant for an audience. Guests shifted in their seats. Some leaned closer to the screen. On stage, Daniel looked confused. Then nervous. He turned toward the technician near the projector booth. What is this? He asked. But the technician simply raised his hands. It wasn't him. The recording continued. Daniel's voice spoke again. You understand why this has to happen. Another voice responded. Calm. Older. Robert Hayes. His lawyer. Yes, Robert said on the recording. But the settlement is unusually high. A pause. Then Daniel laughed. Not the polished laugh he used at parties. A different one. Colder. $5 million is nothing compared to what I'm about to gain. A ripple moved through the crowd. Someone whispered. What? The recording continued. Robert spoke again. You're certain she won't question it? Daniel scoffed. Claire trusts me. The words echoed across the ballroom. I felt people glance at me again. But this time, their expressions were different. Less judgment. More curiosity. On the stage, Daniel stepped closer to the microphone. This is ridiculous, he said loudly. Turn it off. But the video didn't stop. In the recording, Robert spoke carefully. You're asking her to sign away future claims to the company. Yes. And in return you're offering $5 million. Yes. Another pause. Robert's tone changed slightly. Daniel, the company valuation hasn't been announced yet. Daniel's chair creaked as he leaned back. That's the point. The crowd in the ballroom went completely silent. Even the waiters had stopped moving. Robert continued. When the new contract goes public, the company will be worth. Daniel interrupted him. $200 million. Gasps broke across the room. Someone dropped a glass. It shattered softly against the marble floor. But no one looked down. All eyes were on the screen. The recording continued. Robert sounded uneasy now. You're divorcing her before the valuation announcement. Yes. So she can't claim equity. Daniel chuckled. Exactly. The words hung in the air. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Robert spoke again. And the $5 million. Daniel answered casually. A small price to keep everything else. The ballroom felt colder. People were looking at Daniel now. Not with admiration, but with something else. Understanding. On stage, Daniel stepped forward angrily. This is manipulated, he said into the microphone. Completely out of context. But the recording wasn't finished. Robert's voice returned. There's another issue. What? The medical report. The room became even quieter. Daniel's voice lowered. Which one? The fertility test. My breath caught. I hadn't expected this part. Not tonight. Robert continued slowly. The report confirms the issue wasn't Claire. A long silence filled the recording. Then Daniel exhaled sharply. I know. The crowd reacted instantly. Confused whispers spread through the room. On stage, Lily's smile disappeared completely. She turned toward Daniel. What is that supposed to mean? She asked softly. But the recording kept playing. Robert spoke again. So you're still planning to let people believe she couldn't have children? Daniel's voice was flat. Yes. That's harsh. Daniel laughed again. She'll be fine. A pause. She'll have $5 million to comfort her. I closed my eyes briefly. Not from pain, but from a strange calm that comes when the truth finally surfaces. The recording reached its final moments. Robert asked one last question. Do you think she'll ever find out? Daniel's answer came quickly. No. Then he added something that changed everything. Claire always believed the best in people. The video ended. The screen went black, and the ballroom exploded with whispers. Daniel stood frozen on stage. The confident businessman from earlier was gone. In his place stood a man realizing he had just lost control of the story. Lily slowly stepped away from him. Her voice was quiet, but the microphone still picked it up. You lied to me. Daniel turned toward her. Lily, you told me she took advantage of you. It's not like that. Her eyes moved to the screen, then toward me, then back to him. You said she broke your heart. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. Please let me explain. But the room had already turned. People weren't laughing anymore. They were watching, evaluating, recalculating everything they thought they knew. Beside me, Ethan exhaled slowly. Well, he said quietly, that explains a lot. I nodded. Yes. He looked at me carefully. You knew about the recording? No. Then how? I suspected something. What kind of something? I glanced toward the stage, toward Daniel, and the life he had tried to build on a lie. People eventually reveal who they are, I said softly. You just have to give them time. Robert Hayes stepped forward from the crowd. He walked calmly toward the stage. Daniel saw him immediately. His face went pale. Robert, he said sharply. What are you doing? Robert climbed the small steps and took the microphone. His voice was steady, correcting the narrative. The room fell silent again. Robert looked out at the crowd, then toward me, then back to Daniel. For 3 years, he said calmly, I watched a lie grow larger than the truth. He gestured toward the screen. Tonight seemed like the right time to fix that. Daniel's voice shook slightly. You're violating confidentiality. Robert shook his head. No. He pulled a document from his briefcase. This recording was legally preserved as evidence. Daniel's eyes widened. Evidence of what? Robert's answer came slowly. Financial deception. The crowd gasped again. Daniel's entire engagement party had just turned into something else entirely. And for the first time all night, someone asked the question that mattered most. From the back of the room, a woman spoke clearly. So what really happened? Every eye turned toward me, and for the first time that night, I stepped forward. The ballroom was silent. Not the uncomfortable silence from earlier. This one felt different. Heavy. Focused. Every pair of eyes in the room was now on me. A few minutes earlier, those same eyes had been judging. Now they were waiting. I walked slowly toward the stage. My heels echoed softly against the marble floor. Each step steady. Unrushed. Daniel watched me approach. His face looked pale now. The confidence he carried earlier had disappeared. Lily stood a few feet away from him, arms crossed, eyes filled with questions. I stepped onto the stage. Robert handed me the microphone without saying a word. For a moment, I simply looked at the room. Dozens of faces. Investors. Friends. Colleagues. People who had believed a version of the story that was never true. I took a quiet breath. Then I began. I didn't plan to speak tonight. My voice came out calm, clear. The microphone carried it across the room. But since my life has been the subject of tonight's presentation, a few awkward smiles appeared. I think it's fair to tell the rest of the story. I turned slightly toward Daniel, not with anger, just acknowledgement. We met 10 years ago, I said. Daniel was ambitious, smart, determined. The crowd listened closely, and in the beginning, I believed in him completely. That part was true, more true than anyone in that room probably realized. When we married, Daniel's company was still small. I glanced briefly at Ethan. He nodded slightly. Most people here remember those early days. A few guests exchanged looks. Yes, someone said quietly. I continued. We worked long nights, took risks, invested everything we had. Then I smiled gently, sometimes literally. A few people shifted in their seats, because now they were remembering something important, something Daniel had never mentioned. I invested my savings into the company during its second year. The room stirred again. Murmurs spread across the tables. Someone whispered, I didn't know that. Of course they didn't. Daniel had never told them. I continued calmly. It wasn't a huge amount compared to what the company eventually became. I paused, but it mattered at the time. Across the stage, Daniel looked down. He knew exactly where the story was going. A few years later, I said, Daniel began preparing for a major business deal. Several investors in the room nodded. They remembered that period. The company's sudden growth. The excitement. The rumors of a massive valuation jump. What most people didn't know, I paused slightly, was that our marriage was already falling apart. No one spoke. I continued. Daniel asked for a divorce shortly before the deal was announced. I could see people mentally connecting the timeline now. Understanding. Finally, he offered a settlement. I let the silence stretch for a moment. $5 million. The number floated again through the room. But this time it didn't sound like a joke. It sounded generous, I said. And at the time, I believed it was fair. I looked toward Lily briefly. She listened carefully now. Every word mattered to her. But the real value of the company. I turned slightly toward the audience. Was about to explode. Several people nodded slowly. They knew exactly what had happened next. The deal. The valuation. The headlines. The company jumping from millions to hundreds of millions almost overnight. I continued. But I didn't fight the settlement. Daniel looked up suddenly, confused, because that was the one part he never understood. I explained it simply. Not because I was weak. I paused, and not because I didn't know my rights. The room grew even quieter. I signed the agreement because I realized something important. I looked around the ballroom slowly, at every face. Money can build a company. Then I added softly, but it can't build character. No one moved. No one spoke. I turned toward Daniel, still calm, still steady. You thought the $5 million meant you won. He said nothing, but his expression answered. I never saw it that way. A small pause. I saw it as the cost of peace. The same phrase he had used earlier, but now the meaning felt completely different. I continued. For 3 years, I listened while people repeated the same story. I glanced around the room again, that I married for money, that I left with a fortune, that I took advantage. No one laughed now, because they finally understood how incomplete the story had been. I smiled gently, but the truth is simpler. Another pause. I walked away because respect matters more than wealth. Several people lowered their eyes. Some nodded quietly. Even Ethan smiled faintly. I turned toward Lily one last time. You deserve honesty, I said kindly. She nodded slowly, eyes glistening. Daniel tried to speak. Claire. But the words failed. For the first time in years, he had nothing to say. I stepped back from a microphone. Robert placed the document back into his briefcase. The projector screen behind us slowly rolled up, and the elegant ballroom returned to its quiet glow. But the atmosphere had changed. Completely. The laughter from earlier was gone. So were the whispers. Now there was only understanding. I stepped down from the stage. As I walked toward the exit, Ethan caught up beside me. That, he said softly, was the calmest destruction of a reputation I've ever seen. I smiled slightly. I didn't come here to destroy anything. No. I looked back briefly at the stage. At Daniel, standing alone under the chandelier lights. I came to tell the truth. Outside, the cool night air felt refreshing. The city lights stretched across the skyline. Cars moved quietly through the streets below. For the first time in a long time, I felt light. Not because of the money, not because of revenge, but because the story had finally been corrected. Sometimes life teaches us strange lessons. People will judge quickly. They will assume. They will build stories about you without knowing the facts. But time has a quiet power. Truth has patience. And dignity. Dignity doesn't need to shout. It only needs the right moment. I got into a taxi and looked back once more at the glowing hotel windows. Somewhere inside, the party was probably ending early. But my chapter there had already closed. 3 years earlier, I walked away with $5 million. Tonight, I walked away with something far more valuable. My name, my peace, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that truth always finds its way into the light. If this story resonated with you, let me know where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.